When I turned 18, my parents told me to leave home. Now, at 30, I find myself without a place to live. My parents lost all their money, and I'm left on the streets. They never really wanted me. I was just an unexpected addition to their lives. When I was young, life was good, but things changed as I got older. My parents seemed less interested in spending time with me once I wasn't so cute anymore. They were always busy with their business, which was like their whole world. I didn't have any other family nearby, so TV and my teachers were like my family. Even on my birthdays, I often felt alone because my parents were too busy to celebrate with me. They just gave me money to buy whatever I wanted. Christmas and back-to-school shopping were pretty much the same story. We barely had a Christmas tree after I turned 10, but I managed to persuade my parents to get a fake one that I could set up and take down each year. If I had to paint a picture of my parents, they'd be the type who dress in black, enjoy their wine, and have a snobby attitude. The last time I saw them, they hadn't changed much, except my dad had started wearing a toupee. When I turned 16, I asked my parents if I could work part-time at their business, but they said there were no openings. It felt like they didn't want me there. Then, when I turned 18, they expected me to leave home since I was an adult. I was still in high school and working part-time, barely saving for college. Soon after graduation, they gave me an eviction notice and didn't help me move out. I had to rely on a friend's dad for help. I ended up in a rundown apartment, working in retail with no time or experience for college. Just a few months later, I got fired from my job because my manager seemed to have a grudge against me and kept writing me up for trivial reasons. I can't even recall what they were anymore. But I wasn't the only one treated unfairly. I reported the manager to corporate along with others who had similar experiences. Corporate investigated and eventually fired the manager for various reasons, although they kept most of it under wraps. I heard rumors about cigarette theft being one of the reasons, considering the manager was a heavy smoker. Despite corporate's actions, they refused to rehire me, only changing my termination to a layoff on paper to keep my reason clean. It seemed like they didn't want to give me another chance. I quickly ran out of money due to poor financial management and struggled to find steady work, leading to losing my apartment. Desperate, I turned to my parents for help, but they turned me away, leaving me homeless and forced to live in a tent during the winter in someone's backyard. My friends had moved on to college, leaving me behind as a broke kid doing whatever odd jobs I could find to survive. My luck changed when a neighbor of my parents discovered I was living in a tent and offered me shelter to avoid freezing. With her support, I pressured my parents into revealing how to contact my other relatives, although they were reluctant, likely ashamed of how they treated me. Despite their warning not to bother them again, they reluctantly provided me with a list of contact information. I reached out to my paternal grandparents, whom I hadn't seen since I was a baby, and they were overjoyed to hear from me, welcoming me with open arms when they learned of my situation. They immediately flew me over to live with them, essentially adopting me as their own. My parents didn't even bother to see me off at the airport, despite being invited. For nearly a decade, I had no communication with them. My grandparents, upon learning of my parents' mistreatment of me, disowned them legally, removing them from their wills. Although my parents claimed they didn't need anything from my grandparents, their financial situation eventually proved otherwise. After living with my grandparents for about a year, I saved up enough to attend community college. With their support, I earned an associate's degree and landed a good job, thanks to my grandpa's recommendation. Eventually, my grandparents decided to sell me their house so they could retire to Arizona. My grandma's health was suffering in the cold winters, and they wanted to move somewhere warmer. While I was sad to see them leave, I gladly bought the house from them at a third of its value. I'll have it paid off in a few years. My job requires me to travel frequently, keeping me away from home for weeks at a time, but I enjoy the adventure. Right now, I don't have any pets or a girlfriend. I'm focused on my career. However, I hope to find companionship in the future once I have some stability. I don't want to remain a solitary bachelor forever. Returning home after more than 2 weeks away in late 2020, I was startled to find an unfamiliar white van parked in my driveway. Concerned, I was about to contact the authorities when I noticed my parents' business logo on the side of the van, filling me with dread. To my disbelief, my parents had broken into my house and were making themselves at home. Despite my anger, they greeted me casually, as if nothing was wrong. I demanded they leave immediately, but they refused, arguing that it was my grandparents' house. I reminded them that they had sold it to me upon retiring, a fact they would have known had they been involved in my life. However, they persisted, claiming it was their right to stay as it was originally their parents' house. Frustrated, I retreated to my bedroom, locking the door, and called the police. When the police arrived, they were unable to resolve the situation. My parents falsely claimed they had established residency, despite having just arrived, and asserted squatters' rights, lacking evidence to the contrary. And with no surveillance footage or support from neighbors, I found myself in a stalemate. My parents even fabricated a story of a verbal rental agreement with me, and my mother resorted to tears to sway the officers. The police deemed it a family dispute and advised me to pursue legal eviction through the courts, which was complicated by delays due to the pandemic in 2020. Meanwhile, my parents remained in my home without paying rent, flaunting their victory over me. They confessed that their business had collapsed, forcing them to liquidate most of their assets to settle debts. With nothing left but their van and personal belongings, they saw my home as their lifeline for the foreseeable future. Both of my parents managed to secure new jobs after moving in. My father became a delivery driver, while my mother found work as a sales associate. While they were earning, their only contribution was towards the electricity and water bills, which essentially amounted to handing me $100 each month, accompanied by reminders of their generosity. Whenever I broached the subject of proper rent, they dismissed it, arguing that I owed them for the 18 years they spent raising me, despite not requesting reimbursement for that time. They even threatened to withdraw assistance with the utilities altogether if I persisted. Frustrated, I reached out to my grandparents to explain the situation. Though they were displeased, my parents remained adamant, asserting their right to stay in my home. My grandfather expressed regret, acknowledging that had they not sold me the house, my parents wouldn't have taken advantage of the situation. However, I reassured him that I had already initiated legal proceedings for eviction, and my parents were well aware that their stay was temporary. I made sure my parents overheard my determination as I relayed this to my grandparents. Their response was silence. My father, occupied with his delivery job 6 days a week, often kept his distance, clearly discontent with the work. Meanwhile, my mother attempted to assert control over my home during her free time. She insisted on rearranging my living room and even pushed for my parents to claim the master bedroom, arguing they deserved it as my parents. I rejected both demands, asserting that they were not entitled to special treatment and emphasizing that I did not owe them anything simply for raising me, a basic parental duty. It was evident they were trying to assert dominance to prevent eviction. After 4 months, in early 2021, I resorted to legal action against my parents for squatting. Despite their resistance and attempts at manipulation, claiming former ownership by my grandparents and citing their $100 monthly contribution, the lack of a formal rental agreement worked in my favor. Recognizing their futile attempts, the judge ordered their eviction within 30 days. They had no rightful claim to my house. After the court ruling, they confronted me, expressing disappointment for evicting their own flesh and blood. I couldn't help but laugh, seeing the irony in their words, and labeled them as hypocrites for their previous actions toward me. Their lack of concern for my well-being spoke volumes about their supposed parental love. I owed them nothing. They attempted to lay claim to everything that was mine, but their actions hardly reflected those of loving parents. I confronted them, calling them out as snobby, deceitful narcissists, and warned them to prepare for their departure, as I wouldn't hesitate to involve the authorities if necessary. My father's anger was palpable, but my mother intervened, preventing any further escalation. With sneers and tension thick in the air, they eventually left. The final month was fraught with attempts to guilt me or ignore me altogether. I marked each passing day on a calendar in the living room, eagerly anticipating their departure date, which I circled in red. I vividly recall the relief of March 2nd, the day they were finally gone. On the very day they were legally obligated to vacate my home, my parents stubbornly remained, despite having removed all their belongings and even resorting to sleeping on the floor of the guest room in a futile attempt to persuade me to let them stay. They only began searching for an apartment after the court's eviction order was finalized. My mother struggled for weeks to secure a place, eventually settling for a small and subpar studio apartment in a neighboring city due to the limited options available on short notice. The situation bore a striking resemblance to my own experience at 18, adding an ironic twist to the ordeal. I drove my mother to see the apartment, and it was in dismal condition. The walls were an unappealing baby green, the carpet appeared decades old, and the sole window offered a view of a nearby brick wall. Lacking modern amenities, there was no dishwasher, and the stove was unusually small. The bathroom facilities were outdated, with the toilet clearly in need of replacement. The thin walls offered little privacy, as we could hear the loud arguments of neighbors in the adjoining unit. Despite my mother's attempts to evoke sympathy with sad looks and subtle hints about my apparent guilt, I feigned ignorance until she relented. They promptly signed the lease and relocated their meager belongings to the apartment over the weekend. They insisted on taking the queen-size bed, dresser, and flat-screen TV from my guest room, which they had occupied for 5 months. Fed up, I allowed them to take the items, eager to rid my house of reminders of their presence. Their reaction implied they felt slighted, but they left without further demands. As soon as they departed for good, I wasted no time changing the locks on all exterior doors. With all their belongings now in the apartment and their last night spent in my guest room, I began replacing the front door lock while they loaded their van. Their silent observation did little to disrupt my focus, and they left without a word once the new lock was in place. A wave of relief washed over me as their van disappeared down the road. I felt as though karma had finally caught up with them, and I was content to let them live with the consequences of their actions. However, recent communication from my grandparents suggested otherwise. They recently contacted my grandparents to boast about their new business venture, similar to their previous one, now operating in the same state where I reside. Apparently, they're rapidly regaining their former status, enjoying financial success, and indulging in their familiar snobbish lifestyle. I couldn't help but feel a surge of resentment. After subjecting me to homelessness and squatting in my home for months, they seamlessly returned to their privileged ways. Despite my hopes for karma to intervene, their swift resurgence leaves me questioning its existence. Update. Thanks everyone for your helpful advice. I'm starting to see the value in selling the house, especially after discussing it with my grandparents. They support the idea of me moving closer to them if I decide to sell. Moving away would also mean my parents won't be able to track me down easily, which is a big plus. I'm exploring the possibility of getting transferred to a southern location by my company, which I think I'd enjoy due to the warmer climate. Winter has never been my favorite season, especially after having to live in a tent before. Since I'm not deeply rooted where I currently live and don't have many close friends, starting fresh elsewhere doesn't seem too daunting. While I do have some sentimental attachment to this house, it's not like I grew up here, so I'm open to the idea of moving. I understand the importance of beefing up security with more cameras, and I'll be looking into that. Regarding how my parents managed to break in and deceive the police, it was shockingly straightforward. They found an unlocked window, grabbed my spare keys, and then fabricated a story about having a verbal agreement to live here. They even went as far as changing their address with the DMV online to make their claims more convincing. Unfortunately, the police didn't offer much help and just advised me to go through the eviction process. I regret not getting their badge numbers to report their negligence. Quick update. Yes, my parents redirected their mail to my house, adding another layer to their residency claim. If they stayed in my house for over 30 days with my supposed permission, squatters' rights could legally make them tenants. They manipulated the situation and used every tactic to convince the police they had the right to be there. With no clear evidence of how long they'd been living in the house, It became a messy finger-pointing situation, leaving the police uncertain. This led me to pursue eviction through the courts. I did withhold the Wi-Fi password from my parents, since they weren't contributing to the utility bills. However, they found a workaround by using their smartphones as hotspots for internet access during their stay. As for suggestions about leaving negative reviews or exposing my parents' past, I've decided to take the high road and move on. However, if they're involved in fraudulent activities with their new business, I'll be watching with interest to see how it unfolds. Update 2. For those skeptical about the 30-day rule concerning squatters, here's the direct law in the USA. In many areas, if someone resides on your property for over 30 days with your consent, they can claim certain rights, legally becoming your tenants. This often requires following an eviction process. Even in cases where no permission was given, if an unoccupied property is unlawfully entered and lived in, specific rules still apply. My parents manipulated the situation by fabricating permission and misrepresenting their duration of stay in my house, prolonging the eviction process to 5 months. Now you have the facts. Update 3. 5 days later, after some investigation and discussions within the family, I've discovered some curious details about my parents' sudden resurgence into business after bankruptcy. Contrary to speculation, their venture isn't in MLM, even they wouldn't stoop to such tactics. Their new business is notably smaller than their previous one, employing only the 2 of them compared to their former staff. Concerns were raised about potential identity theft, prompting me to monitor my credit closely, a habit I'd already adopted since dealing with their squatting situation. While I wouldn't put anything past them, there's been no suspicious activity on my credit, indicating they haven't attempted to access company funds through me. My paternal grandparents, who genuinely care for me, remain puzzled about the source of my parents' newfound wealth. Despite their attempts to reach out, my parents' calls have been rebuffed since they boasted about their success. It's evident they received no support from my father's side of the family. What about my mother's side of the family? I remembered I had an old list of contacts from my parents, which included my maternal grandmother's landline number. When I was homeless, I tried reaching out to her, but she showed no interest. Although I've never met them in person, my maternal grandparents seem to share similarities with my parents. It's like my father truly found his match in my mother. As someone pointed out earlier, they seem made for each other. I managed to reconnect with my maternal grandmother only to learn that she's been divorced for a while now, and my maternal grandfather passed away 7 months ago, leaving a significant inheritance to my mother. So that's where the money for their new business came from. My maternal grandmother seemed proud of their success and didn't delve into much else during our conversation. It's likely why my parents boasted to her about their achievements, especially since my good grandparents had cut them off. However, I couldn't care less, and neither could my good grandparents. Everyone on my father's side of the family has distanced themselves from my parents. They want nothing to do with them. It's not just me they've alienated. My mother's side of the family is also fractured, filled with divorcees and loners who dislike each other but pretend to get along. In contrast, my father's side is more normal and kind-hearted. Unfortunately, my father tends to burn bridges repeatedly. Even when I was born, my grandparents wanted to be involved in my life, but my parents kept me away from them for some unknown reason. I'm not entirely sure why they did this, but I suspect it's because they didn't want to face judgment for their own parenting. I would have preferred if they had sent me to boarding school or to live with my grandparents. But I suppose narcissists need someone to belittle to feel satisfied. I can only imagine the things they said about me behind my back all these years. Nevertheless, it seems my parents didn't break any laws to start their new business. At least nothing reportable to the IRS. There's no law against using inheritance money to kickstart self-employment, and my mother inherited everything from her father, including his house and land, where my parents now live. It's not the fanciest place, but it's decent, comparable to my own home. This means my parents have a place to stay without bothering me anymore. I'm considering selling my house and relocating, but unfortunately, my current employer doesn't have a branch in Arizona. So my options are either to resign and seek employment in Arizona after selling my house, or to stay put and hope my parents don't bother me again. I'm actively searching for job opportunities because I'm determined not to let my parents find me ever again. If moving proves impossible, I'll invest in installing cameras both inside and outside my house for added security. While I doubt a similar situation will occur, I want to ensure my parents never try to track me down again for any reason. If they need assistance in their old age, I won't be there for them. They'll receive what they gave, nothing. They're dead to me, and the rest of my father's family feels the same way. If I ever have children or stepchildren, I'll make sure I never become like my parents. No child should endure what I did.
Look at that guy over there. He seems pretty unsettling. I overheard the female employees whispering, and I instinctively took a step back. I'm Jason, and today I'm set to meet the female CEO of a rival company. How dare he visit our CEO? Every step I took across that office was accompanied by the cold murmurs of the female staff, leaving me wondering if I'd made a mistake. But if I hadn't intervened, who knows what could have happened to our CEO? People can complain all they want. I haven't done anything wrong. Repeating this to myself, I found myself standing outside the CEO's office. It all began a few weeks ago when our company and Red Rose Incorporated, a competitor, decided to collaborate on a product. My company specializes in designing and selling men's shoes. Although we have a women's shoe design department, we're significantly behind Red Rose in terms of quality and popularity. That's why they approached us for a collaboration. The idea for the joint product came directly from the CEO of Red Rose Incorporated. The CEO of Red Rose Incorporated, a renowned fashion brand, had shown a keen interest in one of my shoe designs. She specifically requested a pair of high heels for their collection, presenting a new challenge for me since my previous work had focused solely on men's footwear. I found myself questioning whether I had the expertise to design high heels that would meet and exceed the sophisticated tastes of women. Driven by the opportunity, I decided to visit the striking Red Rose headquarters. The building was a vision of elegance with its expansive glass walls, gleaming white marble floors, and an ambience that felt almost cinematic. As I arrived on the ground floor, a team of strikingly beautiful receptionists greeted me, each exuding an air of refinement and professionalism. "Hello, and welcome to Red Rose Incorporated. How may I assist you?" asked one of them with a friendly tone. After I introduced myself as Jason, she responded with a warm smile. "Ah, Jason, we've been expecting you. Please follow me." I could hear the distinct click of her high heels on the marble as she led the way. Surrounded by a sea of stylishly dressed women, all moving with an effortless grace and confidence, I remarked, "It seems like there are more women than men here. Does it seem like the most comfortable place for guys, does it?" I attempted to make conversation. The receptionist merely nodded in response. I chuckled nervously, speculating that perhaps this was part of the secret behind their success in women's fashion. I've heard that Red Rose Incorporated is predominantly staffed by women. "Yes, our goal is to create an environment where women feel most at ease," she said with a bright smile. "I absolutely love working here." Upon reaching the CEO's office on the top floor, I was struck by the stunning display of women's footwear at the center of the room. A woman was admiring a pair of shoes on display. "That's the CEO, Mrs. Mary Johnson. Nice to meet you," the receptionist said. "Oh, you're already here," Mrs. Johnson said with a look of pleasant surprise as I introduced myself. She then flashed a warm, endearing smile that made my heart skip a beat. "Please have a seat. I'll prepare some tea for us." "Thank you," I replied, taking a seat on the couch as directed. Mrs. Johnson soon returned with a tray bearing an elegant tea set. The aroma of the tea was captivating, and even with my limited knowledge, I could tell this was something special. "Here you go. It's minty. I hope you enjoy it," she said with a gentle smile. Her grace and elegance were evident, and as I marveled at her gesture, she presented a sketchbook with a detailed drawing of my shoe design. Intrigued, I asked, "What's this?" Mrs. Johnson explained that she had been sketching my shoes as part of her research, noting their simple yet comfortable design that could complement any outfit. "They might not be flashy, but they're versatile, and that's exactly what we're looking for, shoes that look good on everyone, regardless of their style," she said, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm. Encouraged, I may have said something slightly awkward, but she responded by taking my hand firmly. "Please design shoes for our company. They don't have to be extravagant, just ones that look good on anyone," she said with genuine excitement. It's an honor to collaborate with such a talented designer. I was flattered but couldn't shake off my concerns. Your brand is highly esteemed among women for its footwear. I'm sure you have many skilled designers who understand the needs and desires of your female customers. We do have a wealth of talented designers, she replied, but their vision doesn't align with our current direction. They tend to cater to a specific group of people. A specific group? I asked, curious. They believe that only certain women should enjoy fashion. There was a time when I too focused on beauty above all else. But that's not enough. Every woman deserves to feel stylish and confident, she explained. I recalled the fashionable women I had seen on my way to her office and I found myself nodding in agreement. When I suggested creating shoes that would fit and flatter any woman, I had been met with resistance, the dismissive response being that those who didn't put in the effort to look their best were to blame. That's a rather harsh stance, I said, feeling a pang of sympathy for the CEO's predicament. Making such a statement, regardless of one's appearance, can be quite off-putting. So what made you choose me? I asked. Your shoes are wonderful. They have a charm and versatility that we've been lacking. Shoes that any woman can wear and feel stylish in. That passion of mine, which I had almost lost, has been rekindled, she said with a radiant smile. Seeing the CEO's captivating grin, who wouldn't be invigorated by such praise? Very well, let's work together to create the finest shoes. I agreed enthusiastically, and she beamed in response. Little did we know that a major upheaval was just around the corner. A few days later, I visited Red Rose for another meeting with Mary. It's me, Jason. Upon arriving at her office and knocking on the door, I felt an unsettling silence. Normally, Mary would greet me with enthusiasm, but there was no response. Excuse me, I'm coming in, I said, feeling a growing sense of unease. I entered her office and found Mary lying motionless on the floor. Mary. I rushed to her side, but she remained still. Desperately, I placed my ear to her chest, but there was no heartbeat. My heart raced, and I felt the blood drain from my face as my hands began to tremble. Remembering the AED training for my certification course, I immediately contacted the secretary's desk. Mary's collapsed. Please call an ambulance right now, and if there's an AED, bring it. I instructed the secretary urgently and began performing CPR on Mary, but her heart didn't respond. Damn it, is it too late? Sorry, I've brought it, the secretary said as she arrived with the AED. Thank you. Mary, I'm so sorry, I said as I hurriedly lifted her clothing to attach the AED. The secretary nearby gasped and covered her face with her hands, blushing deeply, but I couldn't afford to be distracted by that. I quickly attached the AED pads to Mary's chest and activated it. Her body jolted with a loud zap, but there was no immediate change. Panicking, I followed the AED's voice instructions and administered another shock. After a second jolt, Mary began breathing with difficulty. Mary, are you okay? Please don't move. After confirming her breathing, I gently covered her with my coat. Just as I was about to ask the anxious secretary if the ambulance was on its way, I heard sirens approaching. Can you show the paramedics in when they arrive? Yes, she said, rushing out to guide them. Later, Mary was transported to the state hospital. She later contacted me to inform me that she had a pre-existing heart condition and had collapsed after a seizure. Thanks to the quick response, she was expected to recover fully and be discharged soon without any lingering effects. I breathed a sigh of relief upon hearing that. However, the next day, as I arrived at the office, I was met by the manager, who had a displeased look on his face. Jason, what on earth did you do? He demanded. I was summoned first thing in the morning and berated, but I was completely bewildered. I haven't done anything, I protested. There was a request from Red Rose to cancel the current collaboration project. Is it because Mary collapsed? I asked, concerned. No, he said sternly. They say it's because you did something inappropriate to Mary. Inappropriate? I was taken aback, thinking back to the events of the previous day. I had indeed lifted Mary's shirt to use the AED, but it was done solely to save her life, not with any ulterior motive. So, I hear you lifted Mary's shirt to use the AED, the manager said. They're suggesting you might have done that for other reasons. That's absurd, I protested. Anyway, Mary needs to rest now. Reflect deeply on this and stay away from Red Rose. Frustration boiled within me, and I clenched my jaw. Mary and I had spent weeks refining the design together. The thought that all our efforts might be wasted was infuriating. Please, I'll do anything to prevent the cancellation of this collaboration. Can't you help me convince them to reconsider? I bowed my head, hoping to clear up the misunderstanding, but the manager let out a deep sigh. What are you talking about? Even if the AED incident hadn't occurred, the collaboration couldn't continue after Mary's collapse. This project requires her personal oversight. But Mary's vision is already integrated into the project. If I take the lead, understanding her intentions and the purpose of the collaboration, I can see it through. I remember how pleased she was with my design drawings. I'm sure she'd be devastated if the project falls through. I can't let that happen. Even so, it's a request from them. There's nothing I can do, the manager said, his tone final. This can't be, I protested, but he turned his back on me, signaling the end of our discussion. Just then, his cell phone rang. Who could that be at this time? Is it Mary? He muttered, standing up with a start and answering the call in a flustered manner. Yes, so the project will continue, correct? Understood. I paced nervously, overhearing the conversation and seeing the manager nodding vigorously. When he hung up, he turned to me with a broad smile. The project is going ahead, he said, his demeanor now markedly more positive. It seems Mary has managed to smooth things over from the hospital. She's determined to see this collaboration through, and she's confident that you can handle it. It seemed there had been a misunderstanding. Mary had just called to confirm that the collaboration would indeed continue. I was so relieved by the manager's words that I nearly collapsed from the tension and had to sit down right there. But I was still anxious. Was Mary truly okay? And how did this mix-up happen? The anxiety was palpable. Looks like we'll be resuming our meetings tomorrow. Can you make it to Red Rose? The manager asked. Yes, I replied, though I still felt a twinge of unease. I was thrilled that the project was back on track. The next day, I arrived at the CEO's office as usual. I'm glad you could make it. I'm really sorry for the trouble I've caused. I had no idea my chronic condition would flare up like that, Mary said, visibly relieved to see me. I entered the CEO's office, where Mary immediately began apologizing, though I felt it should have been me apologizing for the distress my actions might have caused. I'm deeply sorry about the incident, I said, acknowledging the impact it must have had on her. Some of her employees were clearly unsettled by the situation. Mary's response caught me off guard. She seemed more angry than relieved. Upset because you saved me, she snapped, before abruptly leaving to gather everyone in the hall. Her usually composed demeanor was nowhere to be seen. I'll be back shortly, she said, leaving with a look of regret. Months passed, and we successfully completed our goal. The prototype for the high heels was ready. Mary's eyes lit up as she admired the shoes in a captivating wine hue. They're simply stunning. I've always dreamed of owning something like this, she said with a wistful sigh. Mary's passion for footwear was well known. That day, she promptly called an urgent staff meeting to clear up the misunderstanding about the AED incident. She made it clear that I had acted solely to help her without any ill intent. To my relief, several employees later approached me to apologize, and the confusion seemed to be resolved. They were probably just envious of your talent, a colleague suggested. Do you really think so? I wondered if my work was indeed good enough to inspire envy. Mary thought for a moment and then said, I can't say for sure, but what I do know is that shoes should be designed with the wearer's needs in mind. Perhaps they just don't understand that fundamental principle. I then offered, would you like to try on the prototype? It seems like it might be the perfect size for you. Mary's face brightened at the suggestion. She slipped off her black heels and stepped into the wine-red high heels on display. Wow, these are much more comfortable than they look, she exclaimed as she walked around the room. Seeing her move gracefully in the high heels filled me with satisfaction. This project, which had faced so many hurdles, was finally coming to fruition. I was thrilled to see her joyful expression and hoped to see it more often in the future. My name is Michael, and I'm 38 years old. I've been working as a programmer at my current company for many years. I've always loved this job. Programming brings me daily satisfaction. Though there were challenges at first, I've grown more confident over time, turning my early anxieties into a strong sense of competence. I've come to believe in the value of dedication and persistence, a lesson I often share with the younger colleagues. For now, I'm content where I am. Maybe opportunities for advancement will arise, or perhaps a new job offer might come my way. But at 38, I can't help but feel that this company is where I'll stay. The thought of further career growth seems distant, almost unattainable. That's what I was thinking when everything changed. A new department head joined our company, a woman named Mila. She's 37, and I admired her for reaching such a high position at a young age. From the moment I first saw her, she exuded confidence and competence. However, her demeanor was icy and distant. The first words she ever spoke to me were, "Did you only graduate from middle school? You're not very bright, are you?" I realized she must have seen that on my resume, but how far back did she really need to look? Unfortunately, her harassment didn't end there. "Middle school grads are a burden to this company. You should just disappear," she continued. Even though I tried to apologize, Mila showed no mercy. The harassment intensified each day until I was eventually stripped of my duties. "You're not suited for main office work," she declared, dismissing the very job I had been doing successfully for years. Mila wasn't interested in listening. Was it really because I only graduated from middle school? Up until now, I never gave it much thought. My education was in the past, and in today's world, people rarely care about where you went to school. It's simply not a relevant topic. A week after being barred from work, Mila summoned me to her office. "How does it feel to be unable to work?" she asked, her tone dripping with condescension. I felt like a shell of my former self. Did Mila know how much my work meant to me? If she was intentionally taking that away, it was the cruelest thing she could do. She continued, "Given your lack of education and incompetence, you're no longer needed at headquarters. You can either be fired or accept a demotion to a remote location." Without hesitation, I replied, "Then fire me." In that moment, everything became clear. Mila's goal was to drive me out of the company. She had taken my work away, creating a hostile environment to force me to leave. Reflecting on her actions, I realized she had been particularly harsh on other employees who, like me, were also middle school graduates. We were constantly reminded of our supposed incompetence, made to feel unwelcome at headquarters. How much distress must everyone have been enduring? I wasn't the only victim. Since Mila's arrival, the company's atmosphere had noticeably shifted from a friendly, collaborative environment to one that suddenly prioritized educational background above all else. I remembered when Mila once asked me, "Why are there so many middle school grads here?" I had never paid attention to people's educational backgrounds. It simply didn't matter to me. When she asked, all I could offer was a vague response, which only earned me her scorn. "Of course, you wouldn't know. You're incompetent," she sneered. "I'm sorry," I muttered, feeling humiliated. Who did Mila think she was? Could she have spoken that way to anyone else if she herself were less educated? Besides, I was no longer allowed to work here anyway. If I couldn't do the job that gave my life meaning, there was no reason to stay. Even if I accepted a demotion to a remote location, Mila would still be my boss. There was no way I could continue working under someone like her. "Thank you for everything. You don't have to come back ever again." That was the line I felt like delivering, and I meant it. I never wanted to work with someone like Mila again, let alone follow her orders. Despite her position, Mila was younger, lacked basic decency, and there was nothing about her I could respect. That day, I completed the handover documents and left the company for good. Since Mila's harassment began, I had seriously considered changing jobs. With my years of experience at the company, I felt confident I could find a new position elsewhere. I had even started exploring opportunities discreetly. After leaving the company, I had a few errands to run and quickly made my way home. Once I finished my tasks, a profound sense of relief washed over me, as if I had finally escaped that toxic environment. The next day, however, I received an unexpected call from Mila. The thought of her reaching out made me angry, but I saw it as an opportunity to voice my thoughts one last time. I decided to approach the situation with a positive mindset. When I arrived at the company, Mila looked unusually grim. I was curious but didn't want to intrude. "What's going on?" I asked as Mila presented the handover documents I had prepared the day before. Her face was ashen. Despite her appearance, I felt no sympathy. "Is there a problem with the documents?" I asked, keeping my tone even. Mila replied, "Do you understand the implications of all this?" "Of course I do. I created these documents, so I understand every detail," I said confidently. The documents detailed the programming work I had developed. While they were technical, they shouldn't have been too challenging. Yet Mila seemed to struggle with them, repeatedly glancing at the pages with a look of confusion. "Is something wrong?" I asked Mila, "What's wrong? I don't understand any of this. What are these documents?" She flung the papers at me in frustration. I was taken aback by her disregard for something I had worked on so diligently, but Mila's anger only seemed to grow. "You did this on purpose to make it incomprehensible for me, didn't you?" she accused. It was astonishing. Anyone with a background in programming should have been able to understand these documents. I had assumed that Mila, with her superior attitude, would be knowledgeable, but it seemed she was completely unfamiliar with the content. I began to feel a surge of anger again. I had finally escaped Mila's clutches and was ready to start fresh, but here she was dragging me back into her chaos. "If you don't understand, you should have mentioned it earlier," I blurted out, my frustration evident. It wasn't my fault if she was too proud to admit her lack of knowledge. Mila's behavior was a prime example of someone who was too self-important. As a department head, she should have known better. If something was unclear, she needed to ask for help, not let her arrogance stand in the way. Yet instead of seeking help from others in the company, she chose to call me, someone who had already left. Her pride seemed insurmountable, and that was hardly a compliment. Mila's next words confirmed my suspicions. "Your way of speaking sounds so sarcastic. It had to be you, no one else," she said. The fact that she was relying on me in this manner was hardly gratifying. If she needed assistance, she should have asked directly rather than summoning me after I had already departed. "Why did it have to be me?" I asked calmly, though I was eager to end this conversation. I wished she would get to the point without all the pretense. Mila's desperation was evident as she revealed. All the employees said they didn't understand the meaning of these documents. It wasn't just Mila who struggled. The rest of the staff was also at a loss. I was taken aback by the revelation that no one else could handle the work I had been doing. Mila's disregard for her employees became glaringly evident. She had always dismissed their efforts, valuing only educational credentials over actual contributions. It seemed she had never paid attention to who was performing what tasks, whether as a department head or otherwise. My frustration flared. "So you brought me back to the company because I'm the only one who can make sense of this?" Mila pounded the desk in frustration, though her anger was misdirected. This situation was the result of her own negligence. Programming can be mastered by adults who are willing to learn, though some aspects do require years of experience. The basics, however, should be comprehensible to anyone with some effort. Mila's failure to educate herself and her reliance on me were astonishing. She had always looked down on others, but when push came to shove, she clung to those she had previously dismissed. Without my expertise, the company's programming efforts would be paralyzed. I began to question whether Mila even understood my role within the company. Her self-centered focus suggested she was unaware of what I actually did, which likely led her to dismiss my contributions and use my educational background as an excuse to strip me of my responsibilities. The company must have faced considerable disruption during my absence, but Mila, oblivious to the significance of my work, probably hadn't noticed the impact. I decided to confront her directly. "Did you know what my role was in the company?" Mila shook her head immediately, confirming my suspicions. Mila's defiance was infuriating. Her blatant disregard for my role, simply because of my educational background, was maddening. But since I was no longer tied to the company, I had decided that revealing the truth might be a fitting final act. The realization of how stunned Mila would be began to amuse me. I figured I wouldn't be leaving the company premises anytime soon and took a perverse pleasure in the idea of hitting back at her. I was, after all, responsible for all the company's programming, an irrefutable fact. With years of experience, I managed complex programming tasks that were crucial to the company's operations. My peers trusted me, and my work was both fulfilling and indispensable. Mila's actions had shattered that. If I was no longer needed, I was ready to step away without regrets. It was clear that if I was to be in a place where my skills were appreciated, it was no longer here. I had accepted that reality. Mila's reaction confirmed her ignorance. "No way. You." Her astonishment was palpable and caught me off guard. It was clear she had been utterly oblivious to the critical nature of my work. The company had relied heavily on my expertise, and her realization now was a testament to her lack of awareness. "Yes, and it's no wonder things fell apart after I left," I said, my frustration evident. "It's infuriating to see how poorly things have gone since you took over. If you had been more attentive to what was actually happening, perhaps none of this would have occurred." Mila's tendency to shift blame had never been more evident. The situation would likely have been avoided if she hadn't become department head in the first place. So, you didn't realize how crucial my work was to the company, I pressed, cornering her with my words. Mila snapped back, you never mentioned it. And no one else knew either. Her reaction made me question her grasp on reality. It seemed she was struggling to admit her mistakes, especially since her tenure as department head had led to significant financial losses for the company. Determined to understand the full extent of the damage, I asked about employees who had some programming knowledge. Mila's response was shocking. I thought they were all incompetent dropouts, so I fired them all. I was outraged. The sheer recklessness of her decision was staggering, and I couldn't hold back my frustration. Since she was no longer my boss, I felt free to express my anger. I had years of experience, and I wasn't going to be lectured by someone who clearly had no understanding of the work I did. Why are you shouting all of a sudden? You're just one of my underperforming subordinates, Mila retorted, questioning my demeanor. But her criticism no longer intimidated me. I was determined to call out the incompetence of a department head who had caused so much damage. Mila needed to confront her own failures and understand that she was wholly unsuitable for the role. Mila's resistance was stronger than I had anticipated. You've been looking down on me this whole time, haven't you? You did this on purpose because I wasn't aware of your work, didn't you? I shook my head. Engaging with someone like Mila was futile. I had done my best to handle everything at work, and it was her responsibility to understand the implications of her decisions. However, Mila didn't give me a chance to counter her accusations. Your silence confirms it. Ha! You're just trying to blame everything on me, she exclaimed, doubling down on her defense. It wasn't that I was choosing to remain silent. Mila had launched into a monologue, completely shutting out anyone else. Her unrelenting tirade made it impossible for anyone to interject. It was likely the reason why the employees she dismissed couldn't stand up to her and ultimately left. As someone who had also been dismissed, I felt a deep sense of sympathy. While I sighed in frustration, Mila continued her tirade with even more hostility. You think you're so important, but you're mistaken, she said with scorn. Isn't she the one who's mistaken? I've never considered myself important, and perhaps that's a more humble perspective than hers. I finally had a chance to respond, but it seemed my words were falling on deaf ears. Isn't it true that the whole mess started because you never bothered to ask about the job? And now I'm the one suffering. Mila always seems to blame others. If you had explained the job from the start, I wouldn't have had to fire you, she continued. I was stunned by her audacity. After all the belittling I'd endured, now she was shifting the blame onto me. The company's loss is also my loss, and it all happened after I became department head, Mila said with a resigned sigh. It was clear she only considered how the situation impacted her. I felt foolish for ever hoping Mila might appreciate the value of my work. If it had been advantageous to her, she would have simply dismissed me and moved on. Life never seems to follow a straightforward path, and her being department head at this time was just my bad luck. Now Mila began to wallow in her misfortune. Because I became department head, I had to deal with a middle school graduate. This has really taken a toll on my mental health. How are you going to take responsibility for this? She screamed, her anger making her appear almost monstrous. Being yelled at unexpectedly was jarring, but I couldn't hold back my retort. Even though it seemed like the worst possible moment to antagonize her, my frustration boiled over. What do you know? Do you have any idea? I started, unable to keep my anger in check. Reflecting on my time as department head, it was evident that Mila was quite pleased with her power. Her subordinates obeyed her without question, and those she targeted for dismissal were completely at her mercy. The company seemed to operate under her dictatorship. However, the moment things began to deteriorate, she shifted her dissatisfaction onto everyone else. And then, out of nowhere, Mila made a ludicrous proposal. You should just come back to the company. Everything will be fine then. What? After all the bullying and harm she caused, now she expects me to return. Who would agree to such an absurd suggestion? For the first time in a long while, I found myself shouting from the depths of my frustration. My own reaction shocked me. If I don't control myself, I might end up becoming as monstrous as Mila. Why are you suddenly shouting? You're scaring me, Mila said, her tone only fueling my anger further. The one who's lost their mind is you, I retorted. I felt utterly pathetic, but I had no intention of going back to the company. It was time to express my true feelings. I was no longer under Mila's control, and I no longer cared about being disliked. Why are you yelling again? Mila's condescension only strengthened my resolve. I will never return to the company no matter what you say. Why not? I'm saying it's okay for you to come back, she replied, still with that patronizing tone. It's because you're there. Besides, the company doesn't need me anymore. I'm offering you a chance to come back and you're angry with me. Mila remained clueless about her own shortcomings. You judged employees solely on their educational background and disrupted the company's harmony, I shot back. Mila looked defensive. I disrupted the company's harmony, she questioned, but I wasn't finished. Her actions were unforgivable. She had unilaterally fired employees who hadn't finished high school, young people with bright futures she crushed without a second thought. I couldn't let that go. I thought you were fired because you understood programming. Mila tried to twist the narrative. Seriously, you're bringing that up again. I wasn't backing down. I'll even retract calling you just a middle school grad if you come back. But once spoken, words can't be taken back and neither can the damage they cause. Have you finally understood how I felt? I asked, knowing full well the answer. There's no way I could understand that, she replied, showing no sign of remorse. It was time to deliver the final blow. I've already secured a job at a major corporation, I announced. Mila's face went pale at the mention of the company's name. When did you manage to get into such a big company? She stammered. I laughed heartily. Ever since you started harassing me, I've been visiting this corporation several times. They were eager to hire me after seeing my years of programming experience. I'll be starting there after I leave this company, and they're even willing to wait for me. It's one of the top programming firms in Japan, and I'm confident it'll be a major step forward for my career. I've secured my future, so I have no more business here, I said coldly. Mila's face twisted in disbelief. How can someone like you, a middle school grad, get a job at such a big company? She demanded, her voice laced with anger. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, I thought we'd moved past the whole middle school grad thing. Clearly you're still stuck in that narrow mindset. Incompetent, she echoed, stunned. I nodded firmly. Exactly. You don't bother to understand your employees, which makes you a thoroughly incompetent department head. You're dragging the company down, and I've never seen anyone so unqualified for the role. You're the first and hopefully the last. Mila muttered, incompetent. Anyway, I said with finality, I will never return. I turned and walked out of the company. I was eager to escape the toxic environment and Mila's relentless incompetence. Later, I learned that Mila was left to manage all the programming alone. Without a proper grasp of it, the company's management quickly declined. The employees, frustrated with her performance, placed the blame squarely on her shoulders. Her pride prevented her from apologizing or seeking help, leading to her resignation. Given her actions, I felt no sympathy for her downfall. Now, having secured a position at a new company, I'm thriving. The environment is supportive, the colleagues are kind, and the team is full of talented individuals. I'm confident that joining this company was the right decision, and I'm excited to continue